static plans are on their way out. We're living in a world where more and more uncertainty, volatility, ambiguity, and complexity is turning anything and everything that we believed in on its head. It started within our lifetime with the 2008 financial crisis to the COVID pandemic and many other incidents in between that really changed our illusion of safety when it comes to the economy and our illusions about what is normal and what is predictable. This all leads to a situation where the traditional idea of having 5-year plans, 10-year strategic frameworks is pretty much redundant and obsolete. It requires a different style and different operating mode of managing teams, of building, designing companies so they are actually resilient for those changes and they don't go out of business once there is a shift in the market. It also poses questions to us as leaders, as principals, as owners, as founders. What kind of operating software is running our own decisions? What kind of operating beliefs do we have? What core assumptions do we have about reality, about the economy, about our business, about the organizations we are running that we are involved in? And it's always good advice to stay ahead of the curve before being swept away by a firestorm of reactivity and urgency. And so how can we position ourselves in such a manner that we don't get swept away, but we position ourselves early enough and strategically so that we can proactively ride on any change, any disruption that comes our way. Disruptions are inevitable. Change is inevitable. The mere fact of hiring somebody new into your company, hiring a new leader is a change. Change is anything where the status quo, the familiar reality is being replaced by a new one, ideally an upgraded one. But in some cases, without our intention, it can also be a disruption. It can be something that is not necessarily desirable. When we think about leading and managing, if we listen to the advice of business schools, we would think about our responsibility is to make plans, to discuss future goals, ambitions, set the direction, and then basically work towards these goals. Now, while that is certainly true in principle, that's not enough. When we set the direction for a company, we always have to be aware that whatever we are doing or whatever we are deciding in terms of the how to get there and how to close the gap between today and that future desired outcome, the tools, the means, the environment in which we are executing the how will change. So any how, any plan will be a mere working version 1. It will be something that needs to be iterated on while you execute. It's very important to adopt this mindset, because it is often the rigid plan that doesn't want to change, where you have diminishing returns, where you have no real outcomes anymore, and you keep holding on to something because of a sunk cost fallacy. You already invested so much into it. That's typically what breaks the neck of companies, not letting go, not eliminating the things that don't work anymore. And where do those things that don't work anymore come from? They come from a decision that was made once, sometime before, where this was considered the best possible approach. And so there is real wisdom in defining the what and the why and keeping the how flexible. It's also something, a mode that I managed my teams, where I always said, we sit together, I tell you what needs to be done, I delegate the area of responsibility to you, and you understand why this needs to be done. Now I want you to come up with the how. And the reason is that me as a manager, I cannot be involved in all the details as situations evolve, and situations always evolve. Especially if you're in fast-paced environments, if you're in volatile environments, growth environments. In general, if your market is volatile, there will be so many changes on an operational level that you won't be able to catch up with, including a lot of relationships, information that flows through informal channels, whether life-saving data point or life-saving information that moves the needle comes from somebody having a walk with somebody else based on the relationship that they have built months earlier. All of these are things you cannot micromanage as a leader. this is where autonomy and this is where decentralization becomes wisdom, but of course within certain guardrails. So the how is basically up to the person I put in charge. And of course, I have to make sure that in my hiring and onboarding process that the person is, of course, suitable and competent for this. But you already see that there is a huge shift away from me as the leader creating a plan for my employee and telling them, here is step 1 you need to do, here's step 2, step 3, and so forth. Often we misunderstand our role as leaders as we need to think for our employees, because maybe we have a certain level of education that our employee doesn't have, or we have certain insights and context. It's typically wiser to give the context to the employee and then let them actually run with it. Why is it that you feel so committed to certain things? Why do you see things that others don't? It's not necessarily because you're more brilliant. It's often because you have more context. You have the conversation at the executive level. You understand what moves the needle. You understand what's going on. And this is something you can transfer to your employees. Of course, it requires training, coaching, investment in them. And ideally, you would build a company where you build long-term retention of employees, where you care about long-term retention, where you want capable people and you don't feel threatened by them. There's nothing more exhausting and energy consuming than running a bunch of obedient followers. People who wait around for directions and orders. People who are managed by fear and punishment and who do the bare minimum so that they don't get fired and they don't get negative attention. Whereas the company is not progressing and making any moves because nobody is really thinking, except for a select few. So I always believe that if I can multiply the ability to think, and when I say the ability to think, I mean the ability to think about the context that we are in, then I can also get more insights, more perspectives, more data points that help me on the management level to actually make wiser decisions. It's all about context. If I understand context, I can make trade-offs, I can mitigate potential negative outcomes, I can set certain factors in place now before something explodes. If I know certain decisions will upset certain people with great certainty, I want to speak with them now to get them on board now so they don't sabotage the decision afterwards. So the more context I have, the better decisions I can make. And this becomes important in a world in which strategic plans and static planning, static thinking doesn't work anymore, where things are unpredictable. You will find that your real strategy actually comes out of the moment, out of the map of reality that you have in the present moment. And when we say present moment, we don't mean the day-to-day perspective, operational perspective or whatever. I mean, we always have a map of reality that is the best possible knowledge that we have. And we treat our map of reality as its own area. It is something similar that I manage a balance sheet, I manage a dashboard. It needs iteration. It needs people to think about how do we make this better? How do we make this more comprehensive? And the direction is clear. You have your strategic outcome, but the how of getting there is often very iterative. Iterative means is you take your best guess, and best guess doesn't mean impulsivity. Best guess means you put some real thought into this. You discussed it. You made a plan. But you take that and you take it as a working version 1, and you're also very much willing to abandon it if it doesn't work anymore. And then there would be a version 2 of the how, a version 3, a version 4. And with every iteration, once you start doing things, you're actually learning things. You're learning what works, you're learning what doesn't work. And now some people would shrug that off and say, why? I have a business degree. I have spent a lot of time in a certain industry. Well, great if the environment is so predictable, that's really great, but that's not the reality for most companies. Environments are extremely unpredictable. In many ways, we are, especially when we're managing, we are exploring. We are in an exploratory stage where we don't fully understand the context yet of what we're dealing with. We launch into a new market, we launch into a new geography, we launch a new product. We pivoted into a new customer, ideal customer profile, and we're now selling to very different people. All of this is explorative. Whatever I make up in my ivory tower with my executive buddies is going to be a very disconnected plan or disconnected approach. And this is where you often, of course, find in corporates particularly how the frontline employees actually have way more knowledge and wisdom about a certain market and customers than executives who are often completely disconnected from reality. You could make the point, yes, they need to focus on high-level topics. They cannot be involved with every detail. That's certainly true. But the question is, if they make decisions on the high level, do they account for the patterns? Do they actually have an updated map of reality of what they're dealing with? Or do they make decisions based on a map of reality from a year ago? Or maybe from what some industry thought leader was saying in the last keynote? Do they actually have a clear-eyed view of reality? And having a clear view of reality and constantly iterating on it, building up on that map of reality is really the way of how you deal with volatility and uncertainty. Often, common sense emerges simply from having a common shared reality with other people. It becomes obvious what the next step is. It is often in those situations where we dismiss the truth seeking, where we dismiss understanding what's going on around us because we think we know better, or we are very much attached to certain beliefs that serve us. That's the moment when we typically make really bad decisions with consequences that will certainly not lead us to our 5 to 10 years goal. And so what does it mean for us as managers in general when we lead teams, when we set company goals? I think it's useful to think of directions. There's a certain direction we want to go to. There's a certain exploratory process that's involved of how to get there, and especially as new technologies come in, as markets are shifting, as geopolitical dynamics are shifting, as regulations can come in overnight and uproot an entire market. So there's certainly a need to keep some flexibility, and a lot of flexibility actually in the how. But we want to set a direction of where we want to go, and the real execution, and this is often overlooked, is actually happening on the ground level. It's happening on those who are in closest contact with reality. And this information is often overlooked. It's often dismissed by decision makers. But in a volatile environment, this actually becomes your most important source of information. Because think about any belief that you have, any belief you have about your situation. Who came up with this? How did this belief enter into your consciousness? Was it a conversation you had with somebody? Was it a board meeting? Was it a book you read? Was it an article you read? Somewhere you picked up this information, and you don't always know how this information came to be. Was it somebody who was reading and dissecting reports? If so, how were these reports compiled? What were the data collection sources? What was the process? Of course, you don't have the bandwidth to go through all of this and to scrutinize every single source. But you need to understand that your beliefs are most certainly not 100% accurate. Your beliefs about your market, your beliefs about the reality of your company, they are filtered. And if this information came from lower hierarchical levels, managers that you are managing, or individual contributors, you also have to be clear about one thing. Truth doesn't travel really well across human hierarchy. When people speak up about certain risks that they are seeing, operational risks, business risks, systemic risks, their first impulse is, it's not my pay grade. Like, I don't have a right to speak about this, or, it's not my responsibility. The second impulse, if they feel more responsible, is that they say, I want to bring this up. I want to talk about this. I think people should pay attention to this. But there is a real career risk for me speaking up, because I've seen what happened to other people in the organization who raised certain topics. They were being dismissed. They were frozen out of certain meetings. They got negative reactions to what they were raising. And so I better protect my own career. It's not my company anyway, so who cares? And then there are people who, of course, take the risk, who raise it. In an ideal environment, this information is taken as a data point into the decision-making process. But unfortunately, in many environments, if it conflicts with the official narrative, what happens is that this was a one-off, and it teaches the rest of the company to never speak up again. And then you enter into a world where top management and the ground levels become increasingly disconnected from each other. Also, vital information is not traveling to the top management anymore. They now need to hire externals and whatnot to actually tell them what is happening in their own market and in their own company. And this leads in its extremes to a situation that is called hypernormalization, where nobody believes the lies anymore or the distortions, and at the same time nobody believes the reality anymore either. So people just show up to work to do the bare minimum, to kind of clock their time, go home, collect their salary. Executives end up doing the same thing. Of course, they don't want to lose their bonuses. Speaking up has already been proven to be a failing recipe. So they do also the bare minimum, not my lane. I stay on my lane. I don't have to talk about the churn risks that I'm seeing. I don't need to talk about that we only have 2 enterprise clients that drive most of our revenue. And actually one of them told me in a private conversation that they are in financial struggles and they might have to cancel our contract in a couple of months. If I bring this up, I could look like the trouble child, so I better don't. It's not my business. I'm not in charge of commercial. So, the company basically starts eroding itself without that context. And in a world where things are constantly shifting and changing, including our example enterprise client who is probably accounting for 50% of the revenue, in that world where constantly changes and disruptions are forced on us, flying blind or not wanting to know or penalizing people for telling is fatal. It's fatal. It's deadly for organizations. It's deadly for companies. And while it might soothe the insecurities of individual leaders, or it keeps certain worldviews intact, or it's basically emotional management for people who should not even be in the roles they're in, the consequences commercially, reputationally, and in many other cases are too grave to let it stand there. So if you understand that you operate in a volatile environment, you need operational truth, you need strategic truth, you need to make sure that every single sensor that your company, that your organization has out there actually brings information back to you so that you can take better decisions, so you have the full context. And now if most people in the company, in the organizations, share that context, if they understand what's going on, certainly there are certain levels of information you cannot share with everyone, because there's a risk that they could go to a competitor with this information, or that they could embarrass the company if certain things are not the way they should be and it goes to the press. Of course, there are certain things you have to be confidential about. There's no doubt about it. But you need to create a shared reality when it comes to what you're actually dealing with the market, with the customers, with the suppliers, the vendors, regulations, and so forth. So everybody in your organization can think with you, and your frontline employees are not dumb. I mean, if they are dumb, then you should question your hiring decisions. I think then you have a huge problem in your HR and your talent acquisition. You hired intelligent people. You hired smart people. So don't treat them like dummies. If you want top talent, if that's an aspiration for you, then you also need to treat them like top talent. You hired smart people, they need context so that their brilliance actually shines, that their brilliance actually translates into results. If you withhold that for them, if you treat them in the 1970s strong arm management style, or treat them like some factory workers, then you're not getting anything out of them except for they will leave and walk out of the doors as soon as they have a better offer from one of your competitors. So managing in volatile and uncertain markets, environments in general requires context. It requires an understanding that the how needs to be flexible, but that we need to be crystal clear about the what and the why, and that the why is really what allows everybody in the organization to think with the leaders and think like the leaders and think as owners. And if that information is not available, or if it's not being made available for particular reasons, it's not being prioritized, then crucial and vital information will not flow into the decision-making rooms, and you will have a whole bunch of executives sipping their cocktails while they're having a business meeting, and just being laissez-faire about it, while they don't see that the train is running into a wall. They don't see it early enough. Everybody knows it, but nobody speaks about it, because it's more exciting to talk about the new AI project and talk about the new product features on the roadmap, and to talk about, oh, this investor was interested in us, and this other magazine wrote about us that we are an amazing company. Like, that's not gonna move the needle. As leaders, as principals, as owners, as executives, it is our role to steward the capital in that company. Like, we are stewards of capital. We are responsible to make sensible decisions. We are stewards of our employees. They have given up other opportunities. They show up every single day to the office or remotely. They show up every single day to work. And that's the time when they leave their families, when they leave loved ones behind, to be part of our world. We have a responsibility towards them. We have stewardship. If we think that this is not the role of a leader, or if we think that this is just stuff for softies or people who don't understand business, then I would question if that is not a complete misunderstanding of leadership, and if the person who thinks like this should even be in a leadership role. You can always be an administrator. You can always be a coward who wears a tie and a suit and who talks big about screwing other people over. But if you are a leader in an organization, there is responsibility involved. There are people who are trusting you, and you have that responsibility, and you carrying that title means that you have to step up to it. And we all know that there are certain philosophies about leadership being a reward, being a status symbol, but you really have to take it back. Leadership is a function, and there are roles, responsibilities, duties that come with this function. And if you understand that you live in an environment where things can break very easily because of geopolitical shifts, technological shifts, market shifts, consumer preferences are shifting, you better want to get ahead of the curve and take that job very serious. And that starts by redesigning how it's run and making sure that your employees are in a position where they contribute to the success of the overall company.